The story begins in a cramped college dorm room at Stanford University, where two ambitious students were about to change the tech world forever. Michael and David first met during freshman orientation, both looking lost among the sea of eager faces. Michael, wearing his signature faded blue hoodie, was trying to find his way to the computer science building when he literally bumped into David, who was buried in his laptop while walking. That awkward collision turned into a 3-hour conversation at the campus coffee shop. They discovered they shared more than just a love for technology. Both came from humble beginnings, raised by single moms who worked multiple jobs to put them through school. Their shared background created an instant bond that went deeper than just being classmates. Late nights turned into early mornings as they brainstormed ideas, fueled by energy drinks and dreams of making it big. While other students partied on weekends, Michael and David could be found in the library or their dorm room, coding and planning their future. They complemented each other perfectly. Michael had a natural gift for explaining complex ideas in simple terms and could charm anyone he met, while David was the coding genius who could turn their wildest ideas into working prototypes. Their big break came during their junior year. David had been working on an AI project that could predict consumer behavior with uncanny accuracy. One night, as they grabbed their usual midnight pizza, Michael had a light bulb moment. He saw how they could turn David's project into a game-changing business tool. That night, sketching their ideas on greasy napkins, TechVision was born. The early days were tough, but exciting. They converted their tiny dorm room into their first office, with Michael making sales calls from his bunk bed while David coded at their shared desk below. They lived on instant noodles and coffee, pouring every spare dollar into their growing company. Their first big client was a small local business that took a chance on them, and they worked day and night to prove themselves. Word spread quickly about the young geniuses who could predict customer needs before customers even knew what they wanted. Soon, bigger companies started calling. Michael handled these meetings brilliantly, wearing his only suit again and again, while David worked behind the scenes to make their technology even better. Their friendship grew stronger with each success and setback. When David's mom got sick during their senior year, Michael spent nights in the hospital with them, bringing his laptop so they could work on code together while keeping her company. When Michael's girlfriend broke up with him just before a major investor presentation, David stayed up all night, helping him practice until he could deliver the pitch perfectly, even with a broken heart. By graduation, TechVision had grown from a dorm room dream into a real company with actual employees and an office in downtown Palo Alto. They hired their first employee, a brilliant programmer who believed in their vision so much that she took a pay cut to join them. The three of them worked from a tiny office above a Chinese restaurant, the smell of fried rice constantly wafting through their windows. Their big breakthrough came when a major retail chain signed on, immediately doubling their revenue. That night, Michael and David sat on the roof of their office building, sharing a bottle of champagne they'd been saving for a special occasion. Looking out at the city lights, they made a pact to always keep their friendship above business, to never let money change who they were. They even wrote it down on a napkin and kept it framed in their office, a reminder of what really mattered. Those were the golden days, when everything seemed possible and their friendship seemed unbreakable. Their company grew rapidly, but they still made time for their weekly pizza nights, playing video games, and dreaming up new ideas. Nobody could have guessed that this seemingly unshakable partnership would one day crumble in the most dramatic way possible. Success changes people, sometimes so slowly that you don't notice until it's too late. As TechVision grew from a small startup into a major player in the tech world, small changes started appearing in the friendship between Michael and David. It began with little things, like Michael missing their weekly pizza nights because of important business dinners, or David staying late at the office instead of joining team celebrations. Their office moved from the cozy space above the Chinese restaurant to a gleaming skyscraper in the heart of the city. Gone were the days of shared lunches and late-night coding sessions. Michael's office was now on the top floor, with a view of the entire city, while David preferred to work from the research and development floor with his team of engineers. The first real crack in their friendship appeared during a regular Monday morning meeting. Michael proudly announced a new partnership with a major social media company, but David's face dropped as he read through the contract details. The deal would give their partner access to user data in ways that made David uncomfortable. After the meeting, he pulled Michael aside to voice his concerns. "This isn't what we started Tech Vision for," David said, his voice filled with worry. "We promised to protect people's privacy, remember?" But Michael just laughed it off, patting his friend's shoulder like he was being naive. "Times change, buddy. We need to grow if we want to stay competitive." Their disagreements became more frequent. In board meetings, David would question Michael's decisions, especially when they involved using their AI technology in ways they hadn't originally intended. While Michael talked about profit margins and market expansion, David kept bringing up ethical concerns and their original mission statement. The tension spread through the office. Employees started noticing how the two founders, once inseparable, now barely spoke outside of meetings. Some sided with Michael, seeing him as the visionary leader pushing the company forward. Others respected David's commitment to their original values, even if it meant slower growth. Things got worse when Michael started making major decisions without consulting David. New partnerships were announced, teams were restructured, and company policies changed. David would often find out about these changes the same way as regular employees, through company-wide emails. During a particularly heated board meeting, David discovered that Michael had been in talks with a controversial military contractor. The deal would be worth billions, but it meant their AI technology could potentially be used in ways that went against everything they'd built the company for. "You can't do this," David said, standing up in the middle of the presentation. "This goes against everything we promised each other." The room fell silent as Michael's face hardened. "The company has grown beyond our dorm room dreams," he replied coldly. "Maybe it's time you grew up too." That night, David couldn't sleep. He pulled out the old napkin they'd framed years ago, their promise to always put friendship first, now fading and wrinkled. Looking at their signatures, he remembered all the nights they'd spent dreaming about changing the world for the better. Now it seemed like they couldn't even agree on what better meant. David started documenting his concerns, keeping detailed notes about decisions that he believed could harm users or misuse their technology. He shared these worries with the board, hoping they would understand the risks. But Michael had already won them over with promises of record-breaking profits and market domination. The once dynamic duo now passed each other in hallways like strangers. Employees started taking sides, and the open, friendly atmosphere of the company began to feel more like a battlefield. Nobody knew it yet, but these growing tensions were just the beginning. Michael was already planning something that would shock not just David, but the entire tech industry. The day everything fell apart started like any other. The office was buzzing with activity, and David was in his usual spot in the research lab, reviewing code with his team. That's when he received an urgent message to join an emergency board meeting. Something in his gut told him this wasn't going to be good. As he walked into the boardroom, he immediately noticed something was wrong. Michael sat at the head of the table, surrounded by board members and lawyers he'd never seen before. The atmosphere was thick with tension, and nobody would meet his eyes. Even Linda, their longtime board secretary, who usually greeted him with a warm smile, kept her eyes fixed on her notebook. "Please, take a seat," Michael said, his voice unnaturally formal. David sat down, noticing the thick stack of documents in front of each person. His own space at the table was empty. As Michael began speaking, David's world started to crumble around him. "We've discovered some very disturbing information," Michael announced, his voice steady but cold. "Our security team has found evidence that proprietary code has been leaked to outside sources." He slid a folder across the table to David. Inside were screenshots of emails and snippets of code that, taken out of context, looked suspicious. David's heart raced as he flipped through the pages. These were fragments of his personal research projects, work he'd been doing in his spare time to find more ethical applications for their technology. "This is ridiculous," he said, his voice shaking with disbelief. "These are my personal projects. I've always been transparent about my research." But Michael wasn't finished. He pulled up a presentation showing charts and graphs, painting a picture of declining company value tied to David's public statements about ethical concerns. "Your actions have been hurting this company," Michael continued. "Your refusal to embrace progress has become a liability." David looked around the room, searching for any friendly faces, any allies who might speak up for him. These people had known him for years. They'd celebrated company milestones together, shared countless lunches, and worked through endless late nights. But now, they all sat in silence, avoiding his gaze. "This is a witch hunt," David said, standing up. "You're twisting everything because I won't agree to sell our technology to military contractors. Because I won't compromise on our values." His voice cracked with emotion. "Michael, we built this company together. How can you do this?" Michael's response was ice cold. "The board has already voted. We're terminating your position, effective immediately. Security will escort you to clean out your office." The words hit David like physical blows. This wasn't just about losing his job. This was about losing his life's work, his reputation, and most painfully, his best friend. As security guards appeared at the door, David looked directly at Michael, searching for any sign of the friend he'd known for so long. "Remember that night on the roof?" he asked quietly. "When we promised to always put our friendship first, what happened to that person?" Michael didn't respond. He just shuffled his papers and avoided eye contact. As David was led out, employees watched in shock. Many had tears in their eyes. They'd all heard the rumors of tension between the founders, but nobody expected it to end like this. In his office, David's hands trembled as he packed his personal items into a box. Photos from their college days, the original napkin with their company idea, the frame holding their first dollar earned. Each item a reminder of everything they'd built together, now shattered. As he walked through the lobby one last time, carrying his box of memories, David heard whispers and saw phones recording. He knew this would be all over tech news within hours. His reputation, carefully built over years of hard work and integrity, was about to be destroyed by the person he trusted most in the world. Outside, standing on the sidewalk in front of the building that had been his second home, David looked up at the Tech Vision logo glowing against the sky. He couldn't have known then that this devastating day would eventually lead to something much bigger. But first, he would have to survive the storm that was about to hit. The next few weeks felt like a nightmare David couldn't wake up from. Every morning, he'd wake up to new headlines about his betrayal of Tech Vision. Michael's PR team had done their job well. News outlets were running stories about stolen code, leaked company secrets, and how David had supposedly tried to sabotage the company's success. His phone wouldn't stop buzzing with messages from reporters seeking comments, but he knew anything he said would just make things worse. Old colleagues he'd worked with for years now ignored his calls. Even his LinkedIn profile was flooded with negative comments from people who didn't know the real story. The worst part was watching Michael on TV, giving interviews about how he'd had to make the difficult but necessary decision to protect the company. Each time, he spoke with rehearsed sadness about how his former best friend had lost his way. "Sometimes the hardest choices are the ones that hurt us personally," Michael would say, playing the role of the wounded but responsible CEO perfectly. David's mom called him every day, worried sick. "I don't understand," she'd say, her voice heavy with concern. "You two were like brothers. How could he do this to you?" David didn't have an answer. He spent hours staring at old photos from their college days, trying to pinpoint exactly when things had started to go wrong. One rainy afternoon, while David was sitting in his apartment feeling lost, his doorbell rang. It was Pete, their first ever employee who had recently left Tech Vision. "I couldn't stay quiet anymore," Pete said, stepping inside. What they're doing to you isn't right. Pete revealed that several employees were uncomfortable with the direction the company was taking under Michael's leadership. They'd seen how the evidence against David had been manipulated, but everyone was too afraid to speak up. The workplace has become toxic, Pete explained. It's all about profits now, no matter the cost. That night, David couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about all the users who trusted TechVision with their data, unaware of how the company planned to use it. He thought about the military contracts that Michael was pushing through, and how their AI technology could be misused. The weight of responsibility felt overwhelming. He started writing everything down, not for revenge, but to protect what they'd originally built the company for. He documented every meeting, every decision, every warning he'd given about ethical concerns. It wasn't just about clearing his name anymore. It was about standing up for what was right. The tech industry started taking sides. Some bigger companies quietly reached out to David, expressing their support but afraid to do so publicly. Others, hoping to stay in TechVision's good graces, publicly distanced themselves from him. Job offers that had been on the table suddenly disappeared. One morning, David received an anonymous email from someone still working at TechVision. Attached were internal documents showing how Michael had planned his removal months in advance. There were emails discussing how to frame the situation, meetings about building a case against him, and strategies for handling the media fallout. The betrayal had been calculated and deliberate. His hands shook as he read through everything. This wasn't just business anymore. This was a deliberate character assassination by someone who had once been like a brother to him. The same person who had stood beside him at his mother's hospital bed, who had helped him through his darkest times, had spent months planning his downfall. David took a long walk that evening, trying to clear his head. As he passed by their old college campus, he remembered the night they'd first dreamed up TechVision. They had such pure intentions then, to use technology to help people, to make the world better. Somewhere along the way, Michael had lost sight of that dream. Sitting on a bench where they used to brainstorm ideas, David made a decision. He wouldn't let this destroy him. He wouldn't let Michael's betrayal turn him bitter. Instead, he would use this experience to build something new, something that stayed true to their original values. But first, he had to wait for the right moment. And that moment was coming sooner than anyone expected. The tech world buzzed with excitement as TechVision's stock price hit an all-time high. Michael appeared on the cover of business magazines, praised as a visionary leader who made the tough decisions necessary for success. Meanwhile, David watched from the sidelines as his former company seemed to flourish without him. Living in a small apartment now, a far cry from his former penthouse, David spent his days reading messages from concerned former employees. They told him about the changes at TechVision, how the friendly, innovative workplace had turned into a pressure cooker. The free-thinking environment they'd built was replaced by a culture of fear and constant surveillance. One evening, while grabbing coffee at his local shop, David overheard two TechVision employees discussing their work. They didn't recognize him. His beard had grown out, and he'd lost weight from stress. "The deadlines are impossible," one whispered. "And the new military project, it feels wrong. But you know what happens to people who speak up?" David's phone kept filling up with LinkedIn messages from his old team members, many who'd quit TechVision. "The company's soul is gone," one wrote. "Everything we built together, all the values we stood for, it's like they never existed." Another shared how Michael had installed monitoring software on all company computers, claiming it was for security, but really to watch for any signs of dissent. The press painted a different picture. They called TechVision a tech powerhouse and praised Michael's bold leadership. Nobody seemed interested in questioning how the company achieved such rapid growth or what happened to their promises about user privacy and ethical AI development. David's mom tried to cheer him up during their weekly dinners. "Remember when you were kids?" she'd say, serving his favorite lasagna. "You and Michael would spend hours talking about changing the world. Sometimes the people who dream biggest fall the hardest. Her words stuck with him, making him wonder if success had been their biggest enemy all along. At a local tech meetup, where David went to keep his skills sharp, he met several former TechVision users who deleted their accounts after hearing rumors about data misuse. Something changed, they told him. The service doesn't feel trustworthy anymore. These conversations helped David realize he wasn't alone in his concerns. The hardest part was seeing his replacement, a yes man Michael had chosen, dismantling the ethical guidelines they'd put in place. The new CTO gave interviews about modernizing their approach, code words for dropping the privacy protections David had fought so hard to maintain. One rainy Sunday, David visited their old university campus. Sitting in the coffee shop where he and Michael had first sketched out their dreams, he opened his laptop to find an anonymous message. "Keep watching," it read. "The truth won't stay buried forever." That same week, Michael announced TechVision's biggest deal yet, a multi-billion-dollar contract with a defense contractor known for controversial AI weapons development. The stock market loved it. The company's value soared even higher, and Michael was hailed as a business genius. David noticed something odd, though. Several key engineers quietly updated their LinkedIn profiles, marking themselves as open to work. People who knew the company's inner workings were jumping ship, even as TechVision appeared more successful than ever. At night, David would sometimes drive past the TechVision building, its logo glowing against the dark sky. The office lights stayed on late into the night now, employees pushing through endless overtime to meet impossible deadlines. It was so different from the passionate, creative workplace they'd built together. Through it all, David kept detailed records of everything he heard and saw. Not for revenge, but because something told him these details would matter soon. He sensed that TechVision's soaring success was built on a shaky foundation, and that foundation was starting to crack. Little did anyone know, the wheels of justice were already in motion. Someone inside TechVision had been gathering evidence, documenting everything that happened since David's departure. The truth was about to come out, and when it did, it would shake the tech industry to its core. The truth came crashing down on a regular Tuesday morning. David was making his usual coffee when his phone started buzzing nonstop. Breaking news alerts flooded his screen. TechVision scandal. Whistleblower reveals massive cover-up. An anonymous employee had leaked thousands of internal documents to major tech news websites. These weren't just ordinary files. They were emails, meeting recordings, and private messages that revealed the carefully planned conspiracy against David. The evidence showed how Michael had manipulated data, created fake evidence, and orchestrated the entire betrayal. The leaked documents included video recordings of private board meetings where Michael openly discussed his plan to remove David because his ethics are getting in the way of our profits. There were emails showing how they'd twisted David's personal research to make it look suspicious, and detailed plans about how to destroy his reputation. Within hours, the story was everywhere. Tech blogs, news channels, and social media exploded with the revelations. The same journalists who had once condemned David were now frantically calling him for comments. His phone rang constantly with calls from former colleagues, industry leaders, and even competitors, all wanting to hear his side of the story. The most damaging revelation came from Michael's own emails. "We need to get rid of him before he exposes our new military contracts," one message read. "His obsession with ethics will cost us billions." Another email chain revealed how they'd hidden the true nature of their AI technology's military applications from both the public and their own employees. Inside TechVision's offices, chaos erupted. Employees gathered in groups, reading the news on their phones, many in tears as they realized the full extent of the deception. The carefully crafted image of a successful, ethical company was crumbling before their eyes. Some started packing their desks immediately, refusing to be part of what the media was now calling the biggest tech scandal of the year. The whistleblower, choosing to remain anonymous, released a powerful statement. "I couldn't sleep at night knowing what had been done to an innocent person. David built this company on principles of ethics and transparency. Watching those values being destroyed while he was falsely accused was too much to bear. David sat in his apartment, overwhelmed by the vindication he'd waited so long for. His mom called, crying with relief. "I always knew the truth would come out," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "Good people might take hits, but they don't stay down forever." What touched David most were the messages from TechVision's users. Thousands posted on social media about how they trusted the company because of the ethical standards he had put in place. Many shared stories about meeting him at tech conferences, where he always emphasized the importance of responsible AI development. The company's biggest clients started pulling out within hours of the news breaking. The military contractor that had signed the controversial deal quickly distanced themselves, citing ethical concerns. TechVision's stock price began to plummet as investors rushed to sell their shares. Michael's response made things even worse. In a hastily arranged press conference, he appeared nervous and defensive, very different from his usually polished self. He tried to dismiss the leaks as disgruntled employee accusations, but struggled to explain the video evidence and his own emails. When a reporter asked about the faked evidence against David, Michael abruptly ended the conference and walked off stage. Former employees started coming forward with their own stories. One told how she'd been fired for questioning the military contracts. Another revealed how the company had hidden data breaches from users. Each new revelation added to the growing picture of corruption and betrayal. That evening, David took a walk in the park where he and Michael used to brainstorm ideas during their lunch breaks. The past 6 months had felt like a nightmare, but now the truth was finally out. He felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. Sad for the company they'd built together, but relieved that their original vision of ethical technology hadn't died. As news helicopters circled the TechVision building and reporters camped outside, David knew this was just the beginning. The tech world was about to learn an important lesson of the true cost of sacrificing ethics for profit. But first, there would be more shocking revelations to come. The fall of TechVision happened faster than anyone expected. Within days of the whistleblower's revelations, the company's perfect image shattered completely. Each morning brought new disasters, and Michael's empire began crumbling like a house of cards. Government investigators arrived at TechVision's headquarters early one Monday morning. Employees watched through the glass walls as officials boxed up documents and hard drives. The sight of suited investigators walking through the once vibrant office spaces felt surreal to many who had spent years building their careers there. The company's stock price dropped so dramatically that trading had to be halted several times. Investors who had praised Michael's bold leadership just weeks ago now demanded his resignation. The board members who had supported him in removing David suddenly found themselves facing tough questions about their own involvement in the scandal. More devastating revelations emerged about how deep the corruption went. Someone leaked Michael's personal emails showing he'd been secretly selling user data to companies they'd publicly promised never to work with. The privacy violations were massive, affecting millions of users who had trusted TechVision with their personal information. Longtime employees shared heartbreaking stories about how the company culture had changed. "We used to be like a family," one developer wrote in a viral blog post. "Then suddenly, we were all looking over our shoulders, afraid to speak up about anything wrong we saw." Others described how they'd been forced to work on military projects they weren't comfortable with, under threat of losing their jobs. The media coverage turned completely around. Journalists who had once criticized David now praised his ethical stance. News shows ran special features about the man who stood up for what's right. But David turned down most interview requests, not wanting to appear like he was celebrating TechVision's downfall. Instead of getting interviews, David spent time helping former TechVision employees find new jobs. He used his connections in the tech world to recommend good people who had been caught in the middle of the scandal. "These talented folks shouldn't suffer because of leadership's mistakes," he told his contacts. Michael's personal life started falling apart too. His fancy house went up for sale. His expensive cars disappeared from the company parking lot. People who saw him said he looked tired and scared, nothing like the confident CEO who had once commanded respect in every room he entered. The human cost of the scandal became clear as TechVision started laying off employees. Whole departments were cut as clients canceled contracts. The once bustling office became eerily quiet. The ping-pong tables and coffee bars that had made the workplace famous sat unused, gathering dust. One particularly tough moment came when the company's original engineers, the ones who had helped build TechVision from scratch, packed up their desks. These were people who had believed in the dream from the beginning, who had worked countless late nights to make it reality. Now they were leaving with boxes of memories and uncertain futures. David received a heartfelt letter from Pete, their first employee who had quit months earlier. "You were right all along," Pete wrote. "We lost our way when we stopped caring about the impact of our work on real people. Money and power poisoned everything we built." The tech industry watched in shock as more details emerged about military contracts that violated international law. Countries began banning TechVision's products, calling them security risks. Partners distanced themselves, afraid of being caught in the growing scandal. The company that had once been everyone's favorite success story became a cautionary tale. Investigation teams discovered that Michael had hidden huge financial losses while presenting fake growth numbers to investors. The SEC launched a formal investigation, and there were whispers about potential criminal charges. The same board members who had helped Michael remove David now faced possible legal consequences for their roles in the cover-up. Late one evening, David walked past their old office building. The famous TechVision logo, once lit up proudly against the sky, was now dark. Through the windows, he could see empty desks and blank walls where motivational posters used to hang. It felt like watching the end of an era, but somehow he felt no joy in being proven right. As the company teetered on the edge of collapse, David knew this wasn't the end of the story. Something new would rise from these ashes, something built on stronger foundations of trust and ethics. But first, the full extent of the damage had to be revealed, and there were still more surprises to come. While TechVision was falling apart, David was quietly building something new. After months of reflection, he decided to channel his experience into creating a company that would do things differently. He started small, working from his mom's garage, just like in the old days, but this time with hard-earned wisdom guiding his path. His new venture focused on ethical AI development, exactly what he always fought for at TechVision. He named it TrustTech, a simple name that reflected his core value: building technology that people could truly trust. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was starting over in the same industry that had almost destroyed him. Word spread quickly in the tech community. Former TechVision employees, still hurt by their old company's collapse, started reaching out. "We want to build something meaningful again," they said. "Something we can be proud of." David welcomed them, knowing these people had learned the same hard lessons he had. Pete, their former first employee at TechVision, was the first to join. "Let's do it right this time," he said, setting up his laptop next to David's in the garage. Soon, more familiar faces followed. They didn't have fancy offices or expensive furniture, just fold-up tables and a shared determination to create something better. The team's first project focused on developing AI that helped small businesses protect customer data. It wasn't as flashy as TechVision's military contracts, but it made a real difference to local shop owners who wanted to modernize while staying ethical. Each successful installation felt like a small victory for doing things the right way. Investors were initially skeptical. "How will you compete without cutting corners?" they asked. David's response was always the same. "We're not here to compete with unethical practices. We're here to prove there's a better way." Surprisingly, this honest approach started attracting a different kind of investor, ones who cared about long-term impact over quick profits. The contrast between TrustTech and TechVision couldn't have been clearer. While TechVision's old offices stood nearly empty, David's garage workspace buzzed with energy. People worked hard not because they had to, but because they believed in what they were building. Lunch breaks were filled with passionate discussions about how technology could help people while respecting their rights. David made sure to build strong ethical guidelines into the company's foundation. Every project had to pass strict privacy and social impact reviews. They turned down lucrative contracts that didn't align with their values, even when money was tight. "Our reputation is worth more than any contract," David would remind his team. The tech media started noticing. Articles appeared about the phoenix rising from TechVision's ashes. But what really caught people's attention was how TrustTech treated its users. They were completely transparent about how their ad worked, what data they collected, and how they used it. Users weren't just numbers in a database. They were partners in building better technology. Former TechVision clients, burned by the scandal, began approaching TrustTech. They'd learned the hard way that cutting corners eventually leads to disaster. David's new company offered something they desperately needed: reliability and trust. Each new client felt like a validation of their ethical approach. The garage soon became too small for the growing team. They moved to a modest office space, decorating it with reminders of their values. The framed napkin from David's TechVision days hung on the wall, not as a bitter reminder, but as a lesson about staying true to your principles. What made David proudest wasn't the company's growth, but the culture they were building. People felt safe raising concerns. Ideas were valued regardless of who suggested them. When mistakes happened, they were admitted openly and fixed quickly. It was everything he'd originally wanted TechVision to be. One day, a young programmer asked David if he was worried about another company trying to copy their success, but with fewer ethics. David smiled and pointed to their wall of happy client testimonials. "Trust takes time to build," he said, "but once you have it, it's worth more than any shortcut." As TrustTech grew, it became clear that David hadn't just created a successful company. He'd created a blueprint for how technology companies could operate ethically in the modern world. But the real test of their principles was still to come, and it would arrive sooner than anyone expected. 2 years after the TechVision scandal, the tech world looked very different. TrustTech had grown into an industry leader, proving that ethical technology wasn't just a nice idea, it was good business. Meanwhile, TechVision's once mighty empire had crumbled completely, its name now synonymous with corporate greed and betrayal. The final chapter of this story began on a rainy morning when David received an unexpected email. It was from Michael. "Can we meet?" It read simply. After everything that had happened, these 3 words carried the weight of their entire shared history. David sat staring at his screen for a long time before replying with an address of a small coffee shop. The coffee shop was the same one where they'd first planned TechVision as college students. David arrived early and chose a quiet corner table. When Michael walked in, David barely recognized him. Gone were the expensive suits and confident swagger. Instead, he saw a tired man in jeans and an old sweater, looking much older than his years. "I sold everything," Michael said quietly, settling into his chair. "The house, the cars, even my tech stock. The legal fees took most of it." He couldn't quite meet David's eyes. "I'm facing criminal charges for fraud. They say I could get prison time." The silence between them felt heavy with unspoken words. David thought about all the angry responses he'd rehearsed over the years, all the things he'd wanted to say if this moment ever came. But seeing his former best friend so broken, those words no longer seemed important. "What happened to us, Michael?" he asked instead. "When did money become more important than everything else?" Michael's hands trembled as he held his coffee cup. "I got lost," he admitted. "Every success made me hungry for more. I started believing my own lies, that the ends justified the means, that ethics were for idealists who didn't understand business." He paused. "Watching you build TrustTech, doing everything right, It showed me how far I'd fallen. That same day, news broke that Michael had agreed to plead guilty to multiple fraud charges. As part of his plea deal, he made a full public confession, admitting to everything: the fake evidence against David, the military contract cover-ups, the privacy violations. TechVision's remaining investors fled, and the company filed for bankruptcy. David's phone lit up with messages from tech news outlets wanting comments about Michael's confession. But he declined all interview requests. Instead, he gathered his team at TrustTech and reminded them why they started this journey. Success means nothing if we lose our humanity along the way, he told them. The tech industry treated Michael's downfall and David's success as a modern morality tale. Business schools began using their story in ethics classes. Startup founders quoted David's principles about responsible technology. The garage where TrustTech started became a minor tourist attraction for visiting tech enthusiasts. TrustTech continued to grow, but differently than TechVision had. They expanded thoughtfully, never compromising their values for faster growth. Their office remained open and welcoming, with transparent glass walls symbolizing their commitment to honesty. Every new employee received a copy of their ethical guidelines on their first day. The old framed napkin from their college days still hung on David's office wall, but now it shared space with TrustTech's mission statement: technology that serves humanity, not the other way around. Visitors often asked about the napkin, and David would tell them the story, not to criticize Michael, but to remind everyone how easy it is to lose your way. 1 year later, just before starting his prison sentence, Michael sent David one final email. "You were right all along," he wrote. "I thought I was building a legacy, but you're the one who actually did it. Not with fancy offices or stock prices, but by staying true to what we dreamed about in that coffee shop all those years ago." David never replied to that last message. Instead, he focused on leading TrustTech into the future, proving every day that success and ethics could go hand in hand. The tech world had learned its lesson, and a new generation of companies followed TrustTech's example. Years later, when people asked David the secret to his success, his answer was always the same: it's simple. Remember that behind every line of code, every business decision, there are real people whose lives you're affecting. Never forget the human side of technology. The story of these two former best friends became more than just a cautionary tale. It became a blueprint for a better way of doing business in the digital age. And somewhere, in a small prison library, Michael picked up a business magazine with David's picture on the cover, smiled sadly, and began to write his own story of redemption.